Some cases begin quietly, but others arrive gasping for air. One cold London night, a man was found unconscious, his breath stilled, his pulse gone. Moments later, against all odds, he came back. And then, as the city tried to make sense of the miracle, it happened again. The man stopped breathing twice. Doctors were baffled. Witnesses whispered about the supernatural. But Sherlock Holmes knew, behind every impossible event lies a trail of logic waiting to be uncovered. Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, Holmes faces a puzzle of life, death, and deception, a man who stopped breathing twice, and a mystery that challenges even the sharpest of minds. Stay with me till the end, because the truth behind this case isn't just clever, it's chilling. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a mystery. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Detectives from all over the world are welcome here, so pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case is worth every second until the very end. Chapter 1. The Impossible Crime. It was on a night of biting frost and crystalline skies, in the early weeks of January, that the extraordinary events which I am about to relate first took shape. Though many years have passed, the image of that evening remains etched in my mind, as clearly as if it were yesterday. The dim glow of gaslight upon the fog-silvered streets, the distant rattle of hansom cabs, and the peculiar weight of foreboding which clung to the city like a silent spectre. Holmes and I had spent the greater part of the day at Baker Street, immersed in a monograph upon the curious habits of Peruvian tobacco smugglers, while I endeavored to bring order to a small mountain of correspondence. The fire burned low in the grate, throwing up a sullen glow that danced across Holmes' sharp features. When the stillness was broken by the urgent clatter of wheels and hooves in the street below, a moment later, a heavy tread ascended our stairs, and a sharp rap fell upon our door. "Enter," Holmes called, without so much as raising his eyes from the microscope. The door swung open, and there, framed in the gaslight of the landing, stood Inspector Lestrade. His countenance bore an expression which, in my long acquaintance with that most practical of officers, I had seldom observed, an admixture of bewilderment and something not far removed from alarm. "Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "I've come on a case that will tax even you, I fancy. The strangest affair in all my years, stranger than the Musgrove ritual, and twice as confounding." Holmes, who had been languid and indifferent a moment before, sprang from his chair with an eagerness that set the shadows dancing wildly upon the walls. "Indeed, when a man of your experience confesses himself at fault, the matter must be of singular interest. Pray, enlighten us." Lestrade closed the door, drew up a chair, and sat with the air of one who struggles to reconcile reason with some monstrous improbability. "The case concerns a gentleman by the name of Sir Reginald Blythe," he said, leaning forward with hands clenched upon his knees. "You'll have read of him, no doubt. Retired from the diplomatic service, highly respected, possessed of a fortune, and residing at Blythe House, near Kensington Gardens." "I recall the name," Holmes nodded. "A man of considerable accomplishment, if memory serves." "Just so," Lestrade continued. "This morning, at 7:15, Sir Reginald was discovered dead in his study, seated at his writing desk, his head resting upon his arms as though in sleep. The door was locked from the inside, the windows fastened and barred. No mark of violence, no trace of poison in the decanter or glass upon the sideboard. A peaceful passing, you might think, save for this. Sir Reginald died not once, but twice. I started from my chair. Twice, Lestrade. My dear fellow, what on earth do you mean? The inspector turned to me with a look that bespoke the utter collapse of all common sense. I mean precisely what I say. Sir Reginald Blythe was certified dead yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock by his own physician, Dr. Alistair Fordyce. Heart failure, so it was thought. The undertaker was summoned, the body prepared, and arrangements set in motion. But before they could remove him from the house, before the coffin even arrived, the man was seen walking about his library at midnight by two separate witnesses, his butler and his niece. Good heavens, I exclaimed. They swear to it, swear upon their immortal souls. The butler even spoke to him, and Sir Reginald answered as calm and collected as I speak to you now. Said he felt unwell earlier, but was much improved and desired solitude. He dismissed them, and they obeyed. This morning he is found dead, against stone dead, in a locked room. The doctor says the body shows the same signs as yesterday, only colder. Holmes had listened to this astonishing recital with the keenest attention, his gray eyes gleaming with an inner light, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. Now he rose and began to pace the room in those quick, nervous strides that I had come to associate with the first stirrings of his intellectual engine. An admirable précis, Lestrade, he murmured. A man dies, so we believe. He returns to life, so to respectable witnesses aver. He dies again, this time beyond dispute. Add to this the locked door, the absence of violence, the want of any rational cause, and you have the makings of a problem most ... stimulating. Stimulating, perhaps, Lestrade grumbled, but confounded too. I tell you, Mr. Holmes, there's trickery here, though. What sort, I can't begin to guess. Holmes halted abruptly before the fire, his gaze fixed upon some invisible point in the air. Tell me, said he, were there any signs of disturbance in the room? Any footprints, ashes, scraps of paper, what you would term Not a thing, replied Lestrade. Everything neat as a pin, desk orderly, lamp burning low, a half-written letter before him. Only, he broke off and hesitated. Only what? Holmes' voice was like the crack of a whip. Only this, Lestrade said slowly. On the blotter, beside the letter, there was a single word, scrawled as though in haste. Just one word, twice. For a space there was silence, save for the ticking of the clock and the faint hiss of the fire. Holmes' face, carved as in marble, betrayed no emotion. Yet I, who knew every line of that hawk-like countenance, could see the storm gathering behind his eyes. Twice, he repeated softly. Curious, most curious. Lestrade, you have done well. I shall accompany you to Blythe House at once. Come, Watson, your hat and coat. The game, as they say, is afoot. Chapter 2. Shadows. In Kensington the fog had begun to thicken by the time our hansom rattled westward through the lamplit streets. Holmes, ensconced in the corner opposite me, sat with chin sunk upon his breast and eyes half-closed, a posture which I had long since learned to associate with the most intense mental activity. Not a syllable passed his lips, save for an occasional monosyllabic direction to the driver, and I refrained from disturbing the current of his thoughts. Yet, as we traversed the dark arteries of London, I could not forbear marveling at the grotesque enigma which beckoned us onward. A man certified dead by a competent physician, dead beyond all reasonable doubt, yet seen, conversed with, and obeyed as living flesh within a span of hours, and now, once more, lifeless under conditions that mocked every commonplace of medical science and criminal inquiry alike. I confess that my professional instincts were piqued no less than my sense of wonder, though my reason recoiled from the monstrous impossibility of it all. At length, Holmes stirred and struck a match, the sudden flare lighting his ascetic features with a spectral glow. He applied it to a cigarette, and expelled a thin jet of smoke which wavered like a phantom in the close air. "Watson," said he, "have you considered what this phenomenon, if phenomenon it be, implies?" "I have considered nothing, Holmes, beyond the fact that the whole business is starkly incredible," I answered. "Dead men do not rise and walk abroad. Therefore, you seek refuge in the comfortable dogma that the witnesses were mistaken," he interposed, with a faint curl of the lip. "A natural supposition, but is it probable? A single hallucination, perhaps, but two, occurring independently, and in persons of sober character. No, my dear fellow, we are confronted by something more substantial than a mirage. Then you credit their story." "I neither credit nor disbelieve, suspend judgment. A mind like mine must act upon data, not prejudice. At present, we possess a very curious anecdote and a very dead diplomat. That is all. But let us not underrate the value of anomalies, Watson. They are the finger-posts to truth. The commonplace explains itself. The strange must be explained." He leaned forward, his eyes glimmering with that cold fire which spoke of a spirit roused to its highest pitch. "You noted the word Lestrade, let fall the word traced upon the blotter. Twice. A singular term, to say the least." "Singular and yet profoundly suggestive," Holmes mused. "Why should a man on the brink of eternity scrawl that one word? Was it prophecy, a confession, a cipher? These are the morsels upon which the feast of deduction is spread." Before I could reply, the cab drew up with a jolt before a somber pile of stone and iron which loomed like a sepulchre in the swirling mist. A flight of steps, flanked by glimmering lamps, led to the great door, now guarded by a constable who saluted as Lestrade alighted. "Blythe House," said the inspector, with a jerk of his thumb. "You'll find the household in a rare taking. Step lively, there's much to see." We were ushered into a spacious hall, where the funereal hush was broken only by the muffled sob of a woman in some distant chamber, and the subdued murmur of servants gathered in knots like shadows of despair. The air was heavy with the mingled odors of polish, lamp oil, and a faint, sickly sweetness that I could not immediately place. "Holmes," whispered Lestrade, as we mounted the stair, "prepare yourself for a queer sight. The body lies as they found it, locked from within, as I said. No key missing, no mark on the door." At the threshold of the study he halted, produced a key, and flung the door wide. The chamber into which we entered was one of those stately apartments, peculiar to the dwellings of an earlier age, lofty of ceiling, wainscoted in dark oak, and lined with shelves where solemn ranks of calf-bound volumes kept watch in eternal silence. A great escritoire occupied the center, heaped with papers and writing. Upon its polished surface lay the blotter, the Hofferton letter, and Sir Reginald Blythe, said Lestrade in a low voice. The figure before us might have been a sculpture rather than a man, seated in his chair, head pillowed upon his folded arms. He bore that ineffable stillness which no counterfeit of sleep can mimic. The iron-gray hair was ruffled as by some sudden gesture. The strong aquiline features, glimpsed in profile, were composed in a calm that mocked the tumult his death had raised. One arm drooped stiffly at his side. The other, flung across the blotter, concealed the unfinished lines beneath. Holmes approached without a word. With a hand as delicate as a surgeon's, he touched the inert wrist, raised the eyelid, bent to examine the lips and nostrils. Then, producing a magnifying lens from his pocket, he began a slow, methodical survey first of the hands, then of the blotter, the letter, the desk's polished edge. I watched him with that mingled awe and irritation which his silences so often evoked, for his face might have been carved from stone. So utterly did it betray neither satisfaction nor disquiet. Presently he straightened himself, his gaze traveling to the windows barred and bolted to the massive door with its solid lock to the hearth, where a few gray ashes smoldered faintly. Then he crossed to the mantel, upon which stood a curious assortment: a silver cigarette case, a porcelain bowl containing a few withered rose leaves, and a small crystal flask, stoppered and empty. Holmes sniffed at the bowl, examined the flask against the light, and made a note in his pocketbook. "Watson," said he at last, in a tone that vibrated with restrained energy, "observe the left cuff of the deceased." I stooped. There, just above the wrist, a dark smear marred the snowy linen irregular in shape, and of a hue which in that dim light suggested neither ink nor blood. "What do you make of it?" I asked. "Very little as yet," he returned. "But the world, my dear fellow, is built of trifles, and trifles, well considered, may shake empires or unmask murderers." He moved toward the door, his eyes alight with some inner vision. "I shall require an interview with the household, every soul, from the butler to the scullery maid. Also, I should like to view the chamber in which the body was laid out yesterday. There is a thread here, if we can but seize it." "And if we cannot?" I ventured. "Then, Watson," Holmes replied, with a thin smile, "we must reconcile ourselves to the singular experience of having been twice baffled by the same corpse." Chapter 3: The Whisper of Ashes. Lingered at the threshold until Lestrade had summoned a servant to stand guard at the study door. Then, with that sudden alertness which bespoke some inward quickening of the faculties, he crossed the room and knelt before the hearth. A few gray ashes lay huddled in the grate, their frail whorls marred by a darker fragment that seemed reluctant to surrender its shape to the embers. "Paper," Holmes murmured, "charred, but not wholly consumed." He drew forth his lens, studying the scrap as tenderly as though it were some rare fossil, then placed it in an envelope from his pocketbook. Rising, he glanced toward the desk, where Sir Reginald's rigid hand still sprawled upon the blotter. "Watson," said he softly, "do you perceive the curious alignment of that hand?" I looked, and saw only that the fingers were clenched. as though by the convulsive spasm of death it shields the writing, I ventured. Precisely, and shields it so effectually that a man dying without haste could scarce have arranged it better. Our diplomat was nothing if not thorough. With infinite care, Holmes raised the hand and laid it aside. Beneath, upon the blotter, sprawled a half-written sheet of heavy paper. The ink blurred in places as though from a tremor of the pen. The opening words ran thus: "My dear Harrington, should aught befall me, you will find the truth in the sentence broke there," as though the writer had been plucked from life in the instant of disclosure. Holmes' brows contracted into two fine, dark lines. The truth in where? In what? That phrase, Watson, is the skeleton key of this entire house, yet its lock is missing. He turned the paper beneath the light, scrutinized its margin, then whipped out a thin blade and detached a corner, which he slipped into his pocket. "Lestrade," he said, "have the ashes in the great bin disturbed?" "Not by me," replied the inspector, with a sullen glance. "We've touched nothing." "Good. Let us preserve that negative virtue, at least." Now he swung round suddenly. "You spoke of the chamber where the body was laid yesterday. Through yonder door," said Lestrade, pointing to a curtained archway at the farther end of the study. Holmes strode across, flung the curtain aside, and passed into a smaller apartment, whose air struck chill after the close heat of the study. It was plainly furnished as a dressing-room, with a couch drawn near the wall, wherein lay a coverlet folded with military precision. On the floor beside it, a shallow basin gleamed dully in the dimness. Holmes bent above the couch, his nostrils dilating like those of a hound upon a scent. Then he turned the coverlet back, revealing a faint depression where a body had reposed. "Watson," said he in a low voice, "do you note anything amiss?" I examined the couch with professional eye. "Nothing, save that the hollow left by the head seems oddly placed. It lies too far to the right for natural posture." "Excellent." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "And what inference follows? That the head was turned sharply, or that the body was replaced in haste?" "A sound surmise. Add to it this." He pointed toward the basin, wherein a ring of scum clung to the enameled rim. Floating in the water was a shred of fine cambric, white but faintly tinged with some pale yellow stain. Holmes fished it out, sniffed, and smiled, that thin, enigmatic smile, which to me was more disquieting than any frown. "A lady's kerchief drenched in eau de cologne," he said softly. "And yet, Watson, why should the dead smell of roses?" Before I could frame an answer, a muffled sob broke the hush. The curtains stirred, and a woman glided in, a tall, dark creature, robed in black, her eyes blazing with that unnatural luster which grief or guilt may kindle alike. "Inspector," she cried, and her voice vibrated like a harp-string, "is it true? Must strangers profane his room, his poor room, while he lies yonder?" Lestrade stiffened. "Mrs. Blythe, these gentlemen are here by authority. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson." She inclined her head slightly, her gaze darting like a falcon's from Holmes to the couch, from the couch to the basin. For the fraction of a second her breath seemed to catch. Then, with a superb effort, she veiled her emotion beneath a languid dignity. "If there is aught I can do to assist," she said, "pray command me. My husband was a good man, a proud man, and if foul play has touched him," her voice faltered. She pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips, and I saw that her fingers trembled. Holmes regarded her with that courtesy which cloaked his keenest scrutiny. "Madam," said he gravely, "you have already aided us more than you dream, but we shall not trespass upon your sorrow. Only suffer me to ask, did Sir Reginald appear wholly himself upon his return yesterday?" Her dark brows contracted. "Wholly." Nahi was agitated. "He spoke little, ate nothing. Once I thought he feared some shadow at his heels, but he would tell me nothing." Holmes inclined his head. "And last night, how did he pass the hours?" "In this room alone. He bade me leave him. I obeyed." Her lips quivered. "When I entered this morning, oh, my God!" With a choking cry she swayed, clutched at the curtain, and was gone. Holmes stood very still, his eyes upon the archway. Then he spoke, more to himself than to us. "A proud man, Watson, and a proud woman. Yet pride, like glass, may shiver at a breath. Come, we have seen enough for the moment. The house will yield us moreth. We know how to listen." As we passed out, I glanced once more at the study, at that motionless figure with its secretive hand and its unfinished sentence, and a chill stole over me, for in the dark polished floor I saw the reflection of Holmes' face, thin, eager, hawk-like, and illumined by a light. I had learned to dread the light that gleams before a tempest breaks. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Shadows. Holmes' request for the household to convene was received with a murmur that ran like a chill draught through the corridors of Blythewood. Lestrade, with the air of one conscious of authority and clinging to it as a drowning man to a spar, bustled about, dispatching footmen in quest of the several inmates. Meanwhile, Holmes stood motionless before the hearth, his thin fingers steepled, his eyes abstracted, as though the flames whispered to him secrets too faint for grosser ears. Presently, the rustle of garments, the shuffle of hesitant feet, heralded the approach of those who were to form the strange conclave. One by one they entered, their faces pale against the somber paneling, and arranged themselves in that dim-lit study where the shadow of death hung palpable. First came Mrs. Blythe, veiled now, yet through the mist of crape her eyes gleamed like dark lanterns. She seated herself with that languid grace which veiled a spirit of tempered steel. Close upon her followed a young man whose features, handsome enough in contour, bore the unmistakable stamp of self-indulgence. His fair mustache was over-trimmed, his cravat a trifle too elaborate for mourning. He flung himself into a chair with an air of aggrieved impatience. "My nephew," whispered Lestrade in my ear, "Mr. Lionel Blythe. Expect him to bristle if there's mention of debts." Next appeared a woman of middle years, prim of attire and tight of lippa, certain Miss Harriet Blythe, the dead man's maiden sister, if I mistook not. Her glance, sharp as a bodkin, flickered round the room and settled upon Holmes with the cold appraisal of one to whom men are but fallible instruments. Behind her, with shambling step and eyes that peered from under penthouse brows, came a figure so incongruous that I scarce repressed a start. He was clad in shabby tweeds, mud-stained and frayed, yet his hands were of that long, nervous type which bespeak a scholar rather than a hind. His hair, grizzled and unkempt, straggled upon his collar, and his voice, when he mumbled a greeting, held the curious modulation of one who communes oftener with books than men. "Mr. Adrian Keller," said Lestrade shortly. "Some sort of German secretary or draftsman, been living here these 6 months. A faint smile touched Holmes' lips, but he spoke no word. Last of the company. With the heavy tread of one to whom subservience has grown into marrow, came the butler, a portly, solemn creature, his visage set in those lines of decorous sorrow which I have seen upon the faces of professional mutes. Behind him hovered a maid, fresh-cheeked and trembling, who glanced toward the corpse with fascinated horror when all were seated. Holmes inclined his head with that grave courtesy which made him, in such moments, seem rather arbiter than detective. "Permit me first," said he, "to offer the tribute of silence to the memory of Sir Reginald." He bowed. The others, perforce, followed suit. The hush that fell was broken by the quick catch of the maid's breath, and by Lionel Blythe's restless tapping of a cigarette case against his knee. Holmes' voice, when it came, was level as a blade. "It becomes my duty, unhappily, to inquire into certain particulars. I entreat your frankness, since upon it depends the swift disentanglement of a most lamentable event. Sir Reginald returned hither yesterday, I believe." Mrs. Blythe inclined her head. "At 4 o'clock. He appeared fatigued more than fatigued breast by some inward care. I pressed him with questions. He repelled them." Holmes' gaze slid to Lionel. "And you, sir?" The young man shrugged. "I scarce saw my uncle. I had business in town. Returned late. Heard this horror at breakfast." The sharp voice of Miss Harriet cleft the air. "Business. A fine name for cards and wine, I'll warrant." Lionel flushed angrily. "Madam, this is neither the place nor the hour," Holmes interposed, with a slight uplift of his hand. "Pray, spare us domestic amenities, Mr. Keller." The secretary started, and his pale eyes flickered like the tongues of a dying flame. "Sir Reginald spoke little yesterday," he muttered, his accent thick. "But once I heard him walk in the garden talking, yes, talking though none was with him. It was strange." "Strange indeed," murmured Holmes. "And did any among you observe him after dinner?" A murmur of negatives answered. Mrs. Blythe's voice added, with a tremor not wholly of grief, "He dismissed us early. He had writing to do." Holmes' glance swept the circle, keen yet impassive. "Writing, yes, that accords with what we find upon the blotter. A letter begun but never finished. To whom, madam, was it addressed?" Her fingers clenched upon her handkerchief. "To Mr. Harrington, a friend of his youth. They corresponded often. Indeed, we must secure that gentleman's address. Meanwhile, one question more. Did Sir Reginald speak of any intention, any peril, any secret burden?" Again that ripple of negatives, save that from the maid's lips fluttered a whisper. Swiftly checked. Only, he said once." "What did he say?" Holmes' tone was velvet, yet it drew her as a magnet draws a needle. "That the truth will out, though I choke upon it." Then he laughed. Such a laugh! She shivered and was silent. Holmes inclined his head gravely. "You have all my thanks. For the present, I beg you to resume your several occupations. I may request the favor of further speech anon." One by one they drifted forth, shadows lengthening as the door closed behind them. Holmes stood very still, his eyes upon the hearth where the gray ashes crouched. Then he spoke, in that voice of quiet triumph which told me some inward light had dawned. "Watson," said he, "the stage is set, the players marshaled. Now for the drama." Chapter 5. The Convenient Villain, the Pallid. November daylight that filtered through the tall casements of Blythewood lent an added chill to the room where Lestrade and I sat in uneasy converse. Holmes had withdrawn to the library with a handful of papers, leaving the inspector to chew the cud of conjecture, a process which, in his case, appeared to produce far more froth than substance. "Well, Dr. Watson," said Lestrade, leaning back with the air of a man who scents the quarry, "if ever a case wore its answer on its sleeve, 'tis this. You marked the young gentleman's manner, shifty, impatient, snapping at the old maid. Like a terrier, guilty, sir, guilty as sin." I ventured a mild protest. "Come, Lestrade, Lionel Blythe may be wild, but surely what?" he broke in. "The oldest story in the book. Spendthrift nephew and an uncle who holds the purse strings. They quarrel. The old man refuses another draft. The lad loses his temper, and it fits like a glove. Mark me, doctor, when we overhaul his papers, we'll find enough IOUs to paper the Strand." Before I could reply, the door opened, and Lionel himself lounged in a picture of easy insolence. His fair hair gleamed in the firelight, his cravat was faultlessly tied, and his cane twirled with an air that set my teeth on edge. Yet there was in his face a certain strained defiance which betrayed more than mere callousness. "Well, gentlemen," he said, dropping into a chair and crossing his legs, "am I to understand that I am honored by suspicion? My aunt, I dare say, is whispering venom as we speak, and Miss Harrietto, she will relish the rail of Cassandra." Lestrade's thin lips tightened. "Sir, no one has accused you yet, but facts are stubborn. You were the last to see your uncle alive, save the servants, indeed." Lionel flicked an invisible speck from his cuff. "And what then? I came home, Lady 11, if you must know. Found the house quiet as the grave pardoned the phrase. Went straight to bed. This morning I awake to tragedian to find myself cast as villain in some penny dreadful. It is monstrous." His voice rose, and for a moment the veneer of languid indifference cracked, showing a glimpse of the raw nerve beneath. Then he mastered himself and laughed a short, bitter laugh that jarred upon the silence. "Pray, question me, Inspector. Ransack my rooms, read my letters. I have nothing to conceal save the appalling boredom of this inquisition." Lestrade darted a glance at me, as if to say, "You hear the tone of guilt." Aloud he said, "We shall certainly examine your effects, sir. Meanwhile, may I ask where you spent your evening?" Lionel's brows lifted in mock surprise. "Where does any man of taste spend it? At the club dining, playing a rubber or two. If you doubt me, ask Harrington or young Fenton. They were of the party." "Harrington," I echoed involuntarily. The name pricked my memory like a pin. Yes, George Harrington, an old friend of the family. "Why?" "Because," said Lestrade, with ponderous triumph, "your uncle was writing to that same Mr. Harrington when death overtook him. Curious, eh?" For the first time Lionel's assurance faltered. His color rose. His fingers drummed an uneasy tattoo upon the arm of his chair. "Writing to Harrington. What of it?" Lestrade leaned forward, his voice low and ominous. "That, sir, we shall learn soon enough. Till then, I advise you to hold yourself at our disposal." With a shrug that strove for nonchalance, yet missed by a hair's breadth, Lionel rose and sauntered from the room. The echo of his footstep had scarcely died when Lestrade smote his knee with a force that made the inkwell leap. "There, did you mark it, doctor? The start, the flush, the whole guilty pantomime. Why should the mention of Harrington discompose an innocent man? No, the case is as clear as print. I hesitated. Yet, Holmes, Holmes, Lestrade snapped his fingers. A marvel, no doubt, but even marvels nod. You'll see I'll clap the bracelets on that young spark before nightfall. At that instant the library door opened, and Holmes entered, a thin curl of smoke wreathing his hawk-like face. He seated himself without haste, stretched his long legs toward the hearth, and regarded Lestrade with an expression of mild amusement. "So," said he softly, "the trap is baited, the net spread, the bird as good as bagged." Lestrade reddened. "If you've another candidate, Mr. Holmes, pray name him." Holmes' lids drooped. His fingers played a phantom tune upon the chair-arm. "Another? Nay, my good Lestrade, I name no one yet. But before you crown your captive, suffer a simple query. How comes it that a man resolved on parricider, its moral equivalent, should choose for scene a chamber whose bolts are fast within, and for weapon what?" Lestrade stared. "Weapon? Why, the man was strangled, was he?" Holmes' voice cut like a whip. "Examine, and then pronounce. Till then, pray reserve your laurels." The inspector rose, muttering, and withdrew in quest of corroboration. Holmes watched him go, his lips curved in that enigmatic smile which was at once a gage and a challenge. Then he turned to me. "Watson," said he, "when you have leisure, kindly glance at the windows of the south corridor. Note the dust, particularly where it is not." And with that he sank into a brown study, so deep that I forbore to question him. Yet in my heart there stirred a sense of gathering storm, and of a mind weaving in silence the threads of a darker web than any yet disclosed. Chapter 6. The whisper in the dust. It was close upon dusk when I found Holmes in the south corridor, stooping in a posture that to any casual eye would have suggested a man in search of a mislaid shilling. His long, nervous fingers hovered an inch above the polished boards, and his keen gray eyes traced invisible patterns in the gathering gloom. "Watson," said he, without lifting his head, "you have come in good time. Your boots are they tolerably clean?" I glanced down in some surprise. "Clean enough, I trust. But why then, pray, remain where you stand? Another step, and we obliterate a most singular testimony." He indicated a space of floor beneath the left-hand window. I bent to examine it, but could perceive nothing save the faint blur of daylight. Holmes queried. "I observe nothing." "Precisely. That is the curious feature." He rose and flicked a speck from his sleeve. "Dust, my dear fellow, is the most candid of chronicles. Here we have a corridor rarely trodden, witness the uniform film upon every board save where. Here, by the sill, the surface is disturbed to prints, lightly traced, as of a foot that hesitated, then withdrew. You suggest someone looked out, or in. The distinction is capital, yet not for present debate. Note further, the smear is recent. See how the edges crumble at a touch. Within 24 hours, certainly. Now, link that with another circumstance." He drew from his pocket a small object wrapped in tissue, and displayed a fragment of some dark, fibrous material. "A thread," I murmured, "of silk and of a hue not often encountered in sober attire. Violet, Watson, a shade beloved of the decadent rather than the domestic, found by a hair's breadth upon the latch of yonder casement." The window, I perceived, was fastened within by a simple bolt. Holmes tried it gently. It yielded with ease. "No tool marks," said he. "No fracture." Ergo, if ingress or egress was sought, it was sought by one to whom the trick of this latch was familiar, or who essayed it from within. A sudden thought struck me. Holmes, could it be that Lionel? He silenced me with an upraised hand. Names, my dear Watson, are as dangerous as drugs. Administer them only on prescription. For the moment, let us register facts and reserve conjecture. Now, as to the chamber of death, have you remarked aught peculiar in its disposition? I confessed that beyond the dreadful spectacle of the body I had observed little. Nor I, said Holmes, at first glance. Yet there was that which jarred upon my sense of proportion, as a false note jars upon a musician's ear. Consider, a man reading at his desk is seized with sudden peril. He struggles feebly, if you accept the theory of strangulation, yet struggles. What then? The chair is overset, the rug disordered, a book lies face downward. But he paused, his eyes gleaming. But the candlestick, Watson, the candlestick stood erect, with flame unquenched. How reconcile such serenity amid convulsion? The assailant may have approached from behind, I began. Even so, the victim's spasm would have jarred the table. And there is more. The marks upon the throat, have you weighed them? They were dreadful enough, I said, with a shudder. Deep, livid, surely such as cord or fingers might inflict. Cord. Yes, but of what substance, and in what fashion applied? The furrow is broad, the edges ill-defined. A strangler's grip leaves crescents of nail. These are other than they seem. He paced the corridor in silence, then halted abruptly. Watson, fetch your coat. We pay a visit to the dead. We re-entered the fatal chamber. Twilight had thickened, and the shaded lamp upon the escritoire cast a wan circle, wherein the pale face of Sir Reginald loomed with ghastly fixity. Holmes bent low, his fingers feather-light upon the bruised integument. Note, he whispered, the inclination of the line upward from left to right. Note, too, the faint duplication to strokes, not one. Does that savor of human hands? No, Watson, it smacks of mechanism. Imagine a band, narrow pliant, passed twice about the throat, and drawn taut by what agency? There lies our crux. A faint sound broke the hush of the rustle of skirts in the doorway. We turned to behold Miss Harriet, her lean figure rigid, her eyes glinting like steel in the lamplight. I beg pardon, she stammered. I but came to pray for the dead. Holmes bowed with grave courtesy. An office none will dispute you, madam. Yet, since you are here, did Sir Reginald own aught of silk, of singular tint? Her gaze faltered. Nay, save, perhaps, a neck-scarf or two. Why do you ask? For no cause that need disturb your devotions, said Holmes suavely. Watson, attend the lady to the door. When she had gone, he closed the door softly and stood, his face transfigured by the cold fire of discovery. Watson, he murmured, the path clears yet darkens. We have touched the fringe of a design so curious, so audacious, that I scarce credit my own brain. Till proof ripens, breathe not a syllable. Boval to Lestrade, who would trample these seedlings with his hobnailed certitudes. Come, we have work abroad before the moon climbs yonder pines, and gathering his cloak about him, Holmes swept from the room like a shadow driven by the wind. Chapter 7. Shadows deepened. The hour was near midnight when we quitted the desolate corridor and stepped into the chill of the moorland air. A pale moon struggling through ragged clouds, flung ghostly gleams across the turrets of Greystone Hall. And from the far woods came the wail of a night-bird that seemed an echo of human grief. Holmes strode on in silence, his cloak flapping like a sable pennon, until we gained the shrubbery beyond the south wing. There he halted abruptly and laid a hand upon my sleeve. "Watson," said he, his voice low yet vibrant, "you are armed." I touched the butt of my revolver. "Always, when I walk with you upon these errands of darkness. Good, for I scent peril, a broad peril, as subtle as the east wind that creeps along these lawns." Hark! From the stillness came a faint metallic chime, as of steel grazing stone. Holmes' head lifted, his nostrils quivering like a hound's. In an instant he was gliding forward among the yews, and I followed, stumbling over tangled roots, my pulses drumming with excitement. We gained the angle of the house, where the terrace ran beneath the study windows. There, in the half-light, a shape moved, stooping, groping, then rose erect, and flashed a beam that cut the gloom like a rapier. "Hold!" cried Holmes, and sprang. The figure leaped sideways with a lithe swiftness that bespoke youth, and the next moment the three of us were locked in a whirl of grappling limbs. My adversary fought like a madman, panting curses through clenched teeth, until Holmes' iron grip wrenched the lantern from his hand and dashed him against the balustrade. "Enough, sir," said Holmes sternly. "Another kick, and you go over yonder parapet." The man sagged, spent. By the moonlight I saw a narrow face, keen as a ferret's, with eyes that burned out of cavernous sockets. His dress was shabby, his breath reeked of spirits, yet there clung to him some trace of better days. Holmes shook him as a terrier shakes a rat. "Name, Jenkins," he gasped. "Gamekeeper till they turned me off. I meant no harm, only to see what—" "Speak, or by heaven, the room," he blurted. "The master's room. Thought maybe they'd left it unguarded. They're things worth a trifle." Holmes' lip curled. "A trifle? And so you prowled like a jackal about the dead. Come, no lies. What drew you to that casement? Was it this?" From his pocket he whipped the violet thread and held it before the fellow's blinking eyes. The man swore a foul oath that he had never clapped eyes on aught of the kind. Holmes regarded him in brooding silence, then thrust him from him with a gesture of disdain. "Begone," said he, "and thank your stars that your guilt is but that of a ghoul, not of a murderer. Yet stir from the village ere dawn, and you swing for felony." The fellow slunk off among the trees, muttering. Holmes stood, watching him melt into the mist, then turned to me with a curious smile. "A pawn, Watson, nothing more. Yet pawns have their value. They mask the march of the greater pieces. Come, we return." We regained the hall by the side door, and had scarce set foot within when a cry, sharp as a knife-edge, clove the hush. It came from above, from the very wing where death had struck. Holmes sprang up the stair with the leap of a panther, and I at his heels. Down the corridor we raced, the lamps flickering in our draught, till we burst into the chamber of doom. The sight froze me in my tracks. Upon the floor, beside the couch of the dead, crouched Lionel Markham, his hands crimson, his face a mask of horror. And on the rug, God help us, lay another form, limp, lifeless, the withered frame of Miss Harriet, her neck ringed with that same hideous furrow which had marred her. brother's throat. For an instant there was silence, the appalling silence of doom broken only by Lionel's choking sobs. Then Holmes' voice rang like steel. "Watson, the door. Let no soul pass." I obeyed, my brain whirling. Lionel had flung himself across the corpse, moaning incoherently. Holmes bent, examined the mark upon the throat, then straightened with eyes that blazed like carbuncles. "The fiend strikes again," he muttered. "And under this roof, ere justice stirred a finger. By the Lord, Watson, the hour's work begins." He tore open the bell-pull and summoned Lestrade, who came clattering with his men, his ruddy visage blanching at the ghastly spectacle. "Good heavens!" he stammered. "Another. Why, the house is accursed." "Not accursed clever," said Holmes grimly. "Here is murder, wrought with craft diabolic. Guard every door, every stair. Let none depart till I have wrung the truth from stone. Watson, stay by me. The game has deepened. The stakes are life and death." And as he spoke, his thin lips curved in that strange, cold smile which heralded the supreme moments of his genius. Chapter 8. Holmes lays his snare. The chill gray of dawn had scarce touched the turrets of Greystone Hall when I found Holmes in the library, pacing to and fro like some gaunt spectre of the night. The lamps still burned, their wan glow paling before the cold promise of day, and upon the long oak table lay a litter of object scraps of paper, twisted threads, a stoppered vial, and a pair of delicate steel forceps glinting in the lamplight. He looked up as I entered, and the keen light in his eyes told me that his brain had known no rest. "Holmes," said I, "a luxury, my dear fellow, reserved for those who fight smaller devils than this. Look, here is the pivot upon which all turns." He held out between finger and thumb a shred of ribbon violet, lustrous, yet marred by a faint brown stain, the same that we found in Sir Geoffrey's chamber. "The same in color, Watson, though not in destiny. Observe the frayed edge, cut by teeth, not by steel. Curious, is it not? And now the question, what teeth?" Before I could answer, the door opened, and Lionel Markham entered, haggard as a man dragged from the rack. His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, flitted from Holmes to me and back again. "You sent for me," he muttered hoarsely. "Pray be seated." "Mr. Markham," said Holmes suavely, motioning him to a chair beneath the window, "your fortitude does you credit. This bloke coming so swiftly upon the last might well have shattered a stronger spirit." Lionel shuddered, his hands clutching the arms of his seat. "It is horrible, horrible, beyond words. My poor Antoine should harm come to her, who never wronged a living soul." Holmes' gaze, cold as a rapier, searched the wan face before him. "That, sir, is the riddle we are all striving to read. Meanwhile, certain trifles perplex me. For example, these stains upon your cuff." Lionel started as if struck, and glanced down. The faint reddish smear upon his sleeve was plain to see. "It is her blood," he stammered. "When I found her lying there, I lifted her head, could not let her rest, soul-like, a broken doll upon the floor." "Most natural," murmured Holmes. "Yet curious, how came these deeper spots upon the inner seam? They suggest, what shall we say, not the act of raising a corpse, but of compression." Lionel's lips trembled. His voice sank to a whisper. "You cannot think I swear to I loved her as though she were my mother. Holmes' hand fell lightly upon his shoulder. "Compose yourself, sir. Suspicion is a weed that springs where the soil is dark, but truth shall root it out, truth and a little patience. You are free to go." The young man stumbled forth like one dazed, and when the door closed, Holmes laughed. Mirthless laugh that boded storm. "You pressed him hard, Holmes," said I. "Is he guilty?" Holmes sank into his chair, clasping his long fingers. "Guilty? Bah! If guilt wore so open a visage, our calling were child's play. No, Watson, the clue lies deeper, and yonder poor wretch is but a puppet twitched by an unseen string. The question is, whose hand moves it?" He sprang up, his whole frame vibrant with energy. "Come, the hour is ripe for a little experiment in human nature." Within the half-hour, the household, one-eyed and whispering, was gathered in the long gallery. Lady Charlotte swept in, austere and silent as an image of stone. Behind her came Miss Agnes, pallid and shrinking, her gaze flitting like a frightened bird's. Lionel lurked apart, gnawing his lip, while near the hearth lounged Colonel Fitzroy, his ruddy face dark with wrath and sleeplessness. Holmes stood before them, erect and cool, his hands behind his back. "My friends," said he, "you have suffered a double blow, a blow that calls for candor, not concealment. Till the hand of justice falls, this roof is sacred to suspicion. Let no one stir beyond its gates." A murmur ran through the group. The colonel growled an oath. "By heaven, sir, do you mean we are prisoners?" Holmes' smile was ice. "Call it a precaution, Colonel, one that may save a life before nightfall. And now, a trifle. I hold here a fragment insignificant. You will say yet, it may hang a man." He drew forth the ribbon, and as the violet gleam smote their eyes, I saw Agnes shrink as though the silken thread had been a serpent. "You know it." Holmes' tone was soft, yet it cut like steel. She faltered, her fingers twisting. I have seen Sucha trimming upon my aunt's nightrobe." "Indeed? Then how comes it torn and stained with that which no robe should know?" "Lady Charlotte, your testimony." The elder woman's gaze was cold and level. "It may be as my niece averred. What of it?" Holmes' answer was a sudden gesture. He flung the ribbon upon the blazing hearth. It writhed, curled, and vanished in a puff of violet smoke. A gasp broke from more than one throat. You destroy the clue," cried Lestrade, who had entered unseen. Holmes wheeled upon him, his eyes like live coals. "The clue, Inspector, was never in the thread, but in the faces that beheld it burn. Watson, you marked the score." "I did," said I, though truth to tell I scarce knew what I had marked, save that Agnes had turned whiter than marble, and Lionel's hands had clenched till the nails bit deep. Holmes bowed with mock courtesy. "Enough for the present. You may disperse, ladies and gentlemen. But let each remember the eyes of Sherlock Holmes, Miss Little, and the hour of reckoning draws apace." And as the company drifted forth, he stood with lids drooped and lips compressed, like a player who has laid his first card and waits the game's recoil. Chapter 9. The second blow falls. The day had worn to its dreariest hour when the house of mourning thrilled once more with fear. A sullen wind moaned through the yews without, and the rain swept in grey sheets across the terrace. When the alarm broke upon our ears like the crack of doom, I had been seated in the library with Holmes, who lay back in an armchair, his lids drooping, his long fingers steepled as though lost in reverie. Yet I, who knew him well, marked the fine quiver of those tense hands and the quick play of his nostrils, tokens that the keen brain within was wheeling at its highest speed. "Holmes," said I, "you burn your candle at both ends. For heaven's sake, snatch an hour's rest." This strain he waved me down with a gesture. "Hush, Watson. The air is charged. Do you not feel it? There is a note in the window." Even as he spoke, a crishreel, rending such as freezes the marrow, rang down the passage. In an instant Holmes was on his feet, his lean form flashing through the doorway. I followed hard upon his heels, my heart hammering like a mad thing. The sound had come from the west wing, and thither we raced, guided by a babel of voices. At the door of a small boudoir we found a knot of servants, white-faced and gabbling. Through them Holmes thrust like steel, and the scene within smote us with the stark horror of some medieval tragedy. Upon the hearthrug lay Agnes Markham, her dark hair streaming, her face upturned and ghastly in the glow of the fire. About her throat a crimson band told its own tale, while near her hando, crowning irony, gleamed the very ribbon whose fellow Holmes had burned that morning. "She breathes," cried Holmes, as he dropped upon his knees and bent over the frail form. "Watson, your aid. Quick, man." My fingers shook as I loosened the cruel ligature and chafed the limp wrists. A flicker of pulse-feeble fluttering answered to our efforts. The lids stirred, the lips quivered with a moan. Thank heaven, life still lingered. Holmes sprang up, his eyes like points of flame. "Lock that door," he thundered. "Let no soul pass till I give word." Lestrade, who had burst in with the rest, gaped like one dazed. "Good Lord! Another attempt! What devil's work is this?" "The devil's work indeed," said Holmes grimly. "And the devil, Inspector, has grown desperate. We have forced his hand, he strikes blind, reckless, and the game nears its end." He stooped, plucked the ribbon from the floor, and held it aloft. "Mark it well, gentlemen. Twice within 12 hours this silken thread has whispered to us, and soon it shall speak aloud. Watson, remain by her side. See that she does not pass beyond our reach. Her tongue may yet unlock the secret." With that he was gone like a greyhound from the leash, while Lestrade and I stared at one another in dumb amaze. Presently he returned, and in his hand glittered a small steel buckle, broken and bent as though by sudden wrench. "Found at the threshold," he said curtly. "The clasp of a slipper woman's size. A hurried flight, a narrow escape. The quarry limps, Watson, and the scent grows warm." Agnes stirred and moaned again. Her eyes opened wide, fixed full upon Holmes as he bent above her. For an instant terror dilated them, terror, and something more, a shadow that flickered and was gone. Her lips moved. We stooped to catch the words. "It was no face," she whispered faintly. "Only a breath in the dark, then still at my throat." Her strength ebbed. The lids drooped once more. Holmes laid a finger on her wrist and nodded. "She will live," he murmured. "But Watson, mark her phrase. No face, only a breath. Our phantom walks, masked, as I feared." He beckoned me aside, his voice low, tense with purpose. "2 points, Watson. First, the Rabboni duplicate of the one destroyed. The fiend clings to his symbol Y. Second, this buckle, wrenched in flight. Who among our fair company limps tonight? Watch, watch with all your eyes, for the next move shall be the last." He swept from the room, his cloak swirling like a black wing, and I, as I gazed upon that gaunt figure, felt the old thrill sense that the master player was clearing the board for his final stroke. Chapter 10: The Shadow of a Deeper Motive. Rain had ceased by the time Holmes and I quitted the chamber of peril, leaving Agnes in the care of a competent nurse. A pallid moon now struggled through ragged clouds, casting a wan radiance over the sodden lawns and silvering the black yews that lined the avenue. I recall that weird half-light vividly, for it seemed in tune with the spectral dread that hung about the house, a dread that deepened with every hour. Holmes strode beside me in silence, his long limbs devouring the corridor, his head sunk upon his breast as in profound thought. Suddenly he halted and faced me, his eyes gleaming with that cold, clear light which heralded the birth of conviction. "Watson," said he, "the mask is thinning. Another stroke, and we shall see the visage beneath." "You have a clue, then?" I cried eagerly. "A chain, rather, and link by link it tightens. Consider, my dear fellow, the first outrage, so cunningly contrived that the law might brand it. The second, brutal, blundering. Why this change of method?" "Desperation," I ventured. "The villain feels your net closing." "True, yet not the whole truth," Holmes rejoined gravely. "The first stroke was the master plan, cool and deliberate. The second, a frenzy, yet frenzy, born not of fear alone, but of baffled desire. There lies the crux, Watson, desire. Strip this tragedy to its skeleton, and what stands revealed? Not sordid greed, mere hunger for gold, but a passion more perilous, more insatiable." I stared, bewildered. "You speak of love." Holmes' lip curled in scorn. "Love, if you will profane the name of fever, an obsession, rather. The shadow of it darkens every line of this drama. See how the ribbon threads its scarlet hint from first to last, a symbol, a token linking victim and assailant. And mark, too, the choice of prey, young, fair, impressionable. Does that savor of avarice? No, Watson. This is a crime of the heart, if so polluted an organ may claim the title." He fell into a reverie, pacing to and fro like some gaunt eagle chained. At length he flung up his head with sudden energy. "The pattern clears. The motive flames behind the smoke. But motive alone is a barren triumphly. Need the hand that struck. And tonight, please heaven, that hand shall betray itself." "You have formed a plan?" I asked breathlessly. Holmes smiled grimly. "The game nears its last move. A word misplaced, a glance too swift, and the mask will drop. Till then, silence. We work in shadows, Watson, and a whisper may startle the prey ere the snare is set." He checked himself abruptly. 4 footsteps echoed along the passage, and a figure loomed in the moonlit doorway, the dour visage of Lestrade, flushed and perturbed. "Mr. Holmes," cried he, "if this don't beat the band, here's another twist for you. They've found Sir Reginald's study, rifled from end to end, drawers ransacked, papers scattered like autumn leaves. What do you make of that?" Holmes' eyes sparkled. "Our phantom grows audacious, soar, rather reckless." "And what is missing, Inspector?" "That's the rub," grumbled Lestrade. "Nothing of value gone, so far as we can see. Plate untouched, notes and bonds in the safe, right as rain. looks more like mischief than robbery." "On the contrary," said Holmes softly, "it was the boldest stroke of all struck, not for gain, but for knowledge. The thief sought no metal, but a scrap of paper, a letter. Perhaps a letter that burns like fire and must be quenched, though blood drench the hearthstone. A. Lestrade, the powder train runs close to the magazine. One spark and we have an explosion that shall rock more than this roof tree." The inspector gaped, but Holmes turned from him with a gesture of impatience, and his voice sank to that low, intense tone which thrilled me like the whisper of fate. "The truth hangs by a hair, and ere another dawn it shall be plucked from the abyss. Till then, breathe no word, betray no sign. Watch, listen, and trust me." He drew the cloak about his spare frame and moved to the window. For a long moment he stood there, stark against the moonlight, his hawk face carved in shadow, his eyes gleaming with that cold, inexorable fire which I had seen once before when, in the old days, he sprang upon the hound of the Baskervilles from out the black fog of Dartmoor. And as I watched him, a strange awe stole over me, for I knew that the hour was at hand when the veil should rend, and the soul of the enigma stand bare before us. Chapter 11. The baited was close upon midnight when Holmes at last unfolded his design. We had withdrawn to a small, dim-lit chamber adjoining the library, where the shadows crouched like watchful beasts, and the ticking of an old bracket clock beat the solemn measure of suspense. Holmes sat at the table, long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his lean face alight with that fierce inward flame which no darkness could quench. "Watson," said he, "the adversary we hunt is cunning and desperate. To grapple such a foe, we must sting him to rashness. The truth lies hidden, yet within his breast smoulders the spark of fear. Let but a breath quicken it, and we shall see the conflagration." "And your method?" I asked. "A simple ruse," he replied. "We shall tempt him with the one lure he cannot resist, the phantom of his peril. Observe." He drew from his breast pocket a sheet of foolscap, already covered with his neat, decisive hand. Across its face ran these words: "The letter is safe. Tomorrow all shall know the truth." R. Beneath, in a disguised scrawl, he had added an address within the city. "A trap, Watson, baited with ink," he murmured. "Tomorrow, at the stroke of noon, this note will lie where eyes most covet it. If our friend walks into the snare, as he must, the game ends. If not, well, we shall devise another move. But I stake my faith upon his vanity. The soul that dares to murders will not shrink from rifling a desk to save its secret." "You speak of a letter," said I. "Is there then such a document?" Holmes' eyes gleamed. "There is, or was. Its existence leaks through every chink of this case. Why else the midnight rifling? Why the blind rage that struck at Agnes? The thing cuts to the heart, Watson. Strip away the husks, and you find," he broke off abruptly, head cocked like a hound that scents the trail. From the corridor came a faint creak, as of a stealthy foot on polished boards. In an instant the lamp was quenched, and we sat in blackness. I heard Holmes' breath, slow and steady, beside me. Then a whisper, like the rustle of silk, as he glided to the door. The latch turned softly beneath his hand. Silence, then a swift, low exclamation, and the sound of retreating steps down the corridor. Holmes struck a match, the flare leaping on his hawk-like features. "A reconnoiter," he said grimly. "Our quarry grows uneasy." "Good. Fear is the spur that drives rashness." He slipped the forged note into an envelope and sealed it. "Now to lay the snare. Come, Watson, we go to the library." The great room lay hushed and spectral in the moonlight, its tall shelves casting bars of shadow across the floor. Holmes crossed swiftly to the escritoire in the far corner. "Here," he muttered, lifting the lid. "So, in the unlocked drawer, the very nest for temptation. Tomorrow, or perhaps ere dawn, a hand will grope here in the dark. When that hand comes," he tapped the butt of his revolver significantly and replaced the lid as we turned to go. A sudden sound smote my ear, a muffled sob, quickly stifled, from the gallery above. Holmes' finger leaped to his lips. We stood motionless, straining our senses. Again it came, faint yet laden with anguish, the sob of a soul in torment. Holmes moved like a shadow to the stair. I close at his heels, but when we gained the landing, all was still. The gallery lay empty beneath the cold stare of the moon. "Strange," I whispered. "Not strange illuminating," said Holmes softly. "Every whisper is a clue, Watson. Come, we have sown the seed. Let us see who comes to reap." With that, he drew me away into the gloom, and the hush of the house closed round us like a spell. Chapter 12. The moment of recognition. The night dragged on with the heavy hush peculiar to great houses after midnight, when every sound assumes an unnatural weight. Holmes and I had retired to the small antechamber adjoining the hall, where a narrow curtain allowed us a view of the library door. There we sat, cloaked in shadow, Holmes motionless as a carved figure, his long hands resting on his knees, his profile keen against the faint glimmer of the fire. I confess that my own vigil was less composed. The rustle of the curtains, the creak of the wainscot, the distant stir of the wind among the usul, pricked my senses into painful alertness. My revolver lay ready at my elbow, and more than once I glanced to Holmes for a sign. But his gaze never left the darkness beyond. So passed the hour, and then, of a sudden, it came, a sound so soft that it might have been the brush of a moth's wing. Yet in that stillness it struck like a drumbeat, a stealthy foot upon the stair. Another and another till the cadence died upon the landing. Silence followed, tense, breathless. Holmes' head inclined ever so slightly. His right hand slid to his pocket. His left touched my sleeve in warning. Then, faint but distinct, came the whisper of a turning latch. The library door, a shaft of moonlight, quivered on the polished floor as the panel opened a span. Through the slit stole a figure, black against the gray, beyond a shape that crouched and listened, then glided to the escritoire. What followed was swift, noiseless, terrible in its suppressed intensity. The lid of the desk rose, a white hand darted forth, then, as the fingers closed on the envelope, a voice rang like steel. "Stand where you are." The intruder wheeled. For one flashing instant the moon smote full upon a face drawn, wild, with eyes that blazed in a mask of terror. Then the lamp leaped to life in Holmes' grasp, and the truth sprang naked to our gaze. But even as recognition stirred my lips, Holmes' hand was raised. "Not a word, Watson," he breathed. "Let the play run out." For the intruder, covering from that first recoil, had flung the letter to the floor and stood rigid, lips moving soundlessly, A dreadful struggle convulsed those features. Then, with a sudden, frantic gesture, the figure dashed for the door. Holmes barred the way back. He said, in a tone that froze the air, "One step more, and I fire." The other halted, trembling from head to foot. For a long moment they fronted one another, the incarnations of relentless will and hunted fear. Then Holmes spoke again, very low, very level. "You have played your last card. Go to your room. In the morning we shall speak fully." The figure stared, lips working. Then, without a word, turned and crept from the room like some broken thing. I drew a deep breath. "Holmes," I gasped. "You know," he swung upon me with sudden vehemence. "No, my dear fellow, I see. That glance, Watson, it was the missing chord, the key to the whole infernal harmony. Till this instant, the theme lacked its dominant. Now the discord resolves." "You mean—" He strode to the table and snatched up the fallen envelope, his fingers trembling with eagerness. "Not here, not now. A single link was wanting. It lies in that faced stamp of a passion older than law, deeper than conscience. You saw it." "I saw fear, guilt, and love, Watson. Love, burning through ruin, love that turned to madness when its path was barred. Ah, blind that I was not to trace the curve of that emotion sooner. It explains all the letter, the poison, the double death. Yes, the last piece falls, and the mosaic stands complete." He checked himself abruptly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Hush, the night is not done with us yet. One more act, and the curtain falls. Till then, silence." And with that he thrust the envelope into his breast, extinguished the lamp, and sank once more into shadow and image of tense expectancy. Every nerve strung for the final stroke. Chapter 13. The final attempt to escape. Dawn crept, gray and chill, across the gables of Ashcombe Grange, filtering through frost-laden panes and touching the long corridors with spectral light. I had slept little, haunted by the vision of that midnight confrontation, the white, strained face, the mute despair, the sudden recoil before Holmes' level gaze. Yet of Holmes himself I saw nothing after that whispered injunction. He had vanished like a shadow, leaving me to my restless vigil. It was near 7 when a sharp rap sounded at my door. Holmes stood there, trim and alert, his features drawn yet afire with some inner purpose. "Dress quickly, Watson," said he. "The final chord trembles upon the air. Our friend, poor soul, plays his last variation this morning. You believe there will be. I know it. The desperate are always swift. 10 minutes, Watson, and bring your revolver." The words sent a chill along my spine, yet I asked no more. When I descended, Holmes was already in the hall, his keen eyes sweeping the panels and stare with the quiet precision of a general surveying his field. The house lay in that peculiar hush which preludes calamity, servants moving on tiptoe, a door closing stealthily afar. Outside, the mist clung in winding sheets about the eaves, muffling the lawns as in a winding dash sheet. Holmes led me through a side corridor to a small chamber overlooking the south gardens. From its casement we commanded a stretch of shrubbery sloping to the river, a sullen, leaden stream, swollen by the rains. Holmes drew me back from the window. "He will come," said he, softly. "The river is his one hope, the letter his one burden. To destroy that, and to flee, it is the last refuge of broken love." Even as he spoke, A figure darted from the shrubbery, a dark, swift shape, glancing fearfully about, clutching something white against the breast. I felt Holmes' hand on my arm like steel. "Quick, Watson." The side stair. We were down and out upon the gravel, in a breath, Holmes flying before me with the stride of a deer. The fugitive had gained the margin, where the rushes bent and whispered above the flood. A punt lay moored by a willow. Into this our quarry sprang, fumbling at the rope with frenzied fingers. "Hold, in the Queen's name!" Holmes' voice rang like a clarion. The figure wheeled, saw us, and, with the scream of a soul driven past reason, leaped, not into the boat, but outward, into the sullen tide. I cried aloud, and should have plunged after, but Holmes' grasp fettered me. "No use, Watson, look." For even as the waters closed above that struggling form, there came a swirl, a single wild arm flung skyward, and then nothing save the oily eddies sweeping seaward. Holmes stood motionless, his features set in lines of stone. "Too late," said he, at last. "Too late for law, for pity, for hope. The river has claimed its own." We lingered, silent, while the gray ripples lapped and whispered at our feet. At length Holmes turned, his voice low, yet vibrant with some stern emotion. "There is work still, the truth must be told, though the lips that could confirm it are dumb. All hangs now on this." He drew forth the crumpled envelope, damp from the fugitive's grasp. "The letter, the first seed of this tragedy. See how fate clings to its instrument." I glanced at the superscription, a woman's hand, delicate, trembling, yet instinct with passion. The seal was broken. Within lay but a single sheet, blurred with the smear of tears. Holmes' eyes scanned it with that devouring swiftness I knew so well. Then he folded it reverently and slipped it to his breast. "Watson," said he, very gravely, "prepare yourself. The curtain rises upon the last act, and its colors are of blood and fire and human longing. To the house there shall be a gathering, a reckoning, such a revelation as will shake these halls to their foundations." Without another word he strode up the slope, his figure dark against the whitening sky, while I followed, my heart heavy with the shadow of that lifeless form borne by the current to its unmarked grave. What could be the truth so long withheld? What passion had driven one, gentle by all seeming, to this extremity of guilt and despair? The answer lay but a little space ahead. How fraught with tragedy was the road that led to it. Chapter 14. Holmes closes in, the final clue revealed back within the shadowed corridors of Ashcombe Grange. A hush lay thick as the winter mist without. The servants had gathered in tremulous knots, their whispers fluttering through the draughty passages like the rustle of dead leaves. The news, wild, incoherent, had sped from lip to lip, a cry by the river, a shape borne by the flood, the stern visage of Mr. Holmes, like a doom pronounced. Holmes himself gave no sign of perturbation. His step was light, his bearing almost negligent, yet the steel-blue fire smoldered deep in his eyes. I had seen that look before, the look that heralded some swift and terrible unmasking. "Watson," said he, pausing before the great oaken door of the library, "this house is a whispering gallery of guilt. Each shadow holds a secret. Each silence throbs with an unspoken cry. Yet mark me, truth is simple as a child's sum. When once the symbols stand in order, you have it all. Then all? No, not all. There is a trifling link still to set, and it lies perhaps upon yonder escritoire. He entered, and I followed. The library was as we had quitted it, overnight. Holmes went straight to the writing table. A faint smile curved his lips as he lifted a blotter and drew forth a thin, gleaming object, a gold sleeve link, delicately chased. "Observe, Watson," said he, "the mate to that which gleamed upon the rug when we first inspected this chamber. Strange, is it not, how the smallest metal circlet may clasp a man's soul in its relentless grip?" I examined the trinket. It was of peculiar pattern, a serpent, coiled thrice upon itself, the eyes twin points of garnet. I remembered well the night when Holmes had stooped so swiftly, had straightened with that inscrutable flicker across his features. Now the riddle deepened. "This," murmured he, slipping it into his pocket, "is the final cipher stroke. With it, Watson, the whole dark script spells itself in letters of fire." Before I could frame a question, the door opened and Inspector Lestrade thrust in his sharp visage, gray with the chill air. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said he, with an assumption of briskness that rang hollow, "the body will be searched for downstream. But as to the case, pretty plain sailing now, I should think. A guilty conscience, a splash in the river, there's the moral, and a neat one." Holmes' glance was like a rapier. "Indeed? Then permit me to assure you that if your sailing be so plain, it is towards a reef that will shatter every plank beneath you. The drowned man, if drowned he be, was but the last echo of a chord struck long since in this house. There are hands, living hands, that shaped his fate and steered him to that black eddy." Lestrade's jaw fell. His small eyes blinked. "You mean—" "I mean," said Holmes, with a cold lucidity that froze the air, "that this case is not closed, but opened as the surgeon opens a cancer. That the root may be torn forth and flung to the light. You shall assist me, Inspector. In 1 hour I require every soul beneath this roof assembled in the long gallery. 1 hour, mark it well. Till then, Watson, come." He swept from the room, his cloak swirling like a sable wing. I followed, my mind a whirl of conjectures, my pulses quick with the sense of impending drama. As we mounted the stair, he spoke, half to himself, in that low, tense tone which told of thought at white heat. "The letter, the length, the poison in the glass. Watson, do you not see how the pattern flames clear? It is a tragedy woven of love fouled by pride, and pride goaded by fear. One player has vanished beneath the flood, but the prime mover, the dark intelligence, stands yet upon the stage, and the hour strikes." He flung open the door of his temporary chamber and motioned me within. On the table lay a map of the Grange, a slip of paper scrawled with cryptic signs, and, beside them, the letter we had wrested from death's grasp. Holmes bent above these tokens as a general might over his battle charts. "Watson," said he, turning swiftly, "the end is upon us. Guard your nerve, for what follows will tax it sorely. In this hour the mask will fall, and beneath it such a face as shall haunt your dreams." He broke off, and for an instant there leaped in his eyes a flame that was not triumph, but something darker, pity, perhaps, or the shadow of that tragic understanding which so often darkened his victories. Then, with an impatient gesture, he caught up the map, thrust it in his pocket, and took his hat. "The gallery, Watson, the theater of the last act. Come, we go to summon the players." Chapter 15. The Final Gathering the long gallery of Ashcombe. Grange had the solemnity of a tribunal chamber that night. Its walls, lined with the portraits of grim-faced Ashcombes long since dust, seemed to lean forward in judgment, their dim eyes glimmering in the uncertain light of the chandeliers. A raw wind keened beyond the mullioned windows, and the curtains stirred like uneasy spirits. One by one, the household drifted in under Holmes' quiet but imperious summons. I observed them closely, for Holmes had bidden me keep my senses sharp. The smallest tremor, Watson, may shout a confession to him who listens with his eyes. First came Miss Beatrice Ashcombe, pale as alabaster, her proud carriage shaken but not broken, and in her glance a desperate fire that spoke of sleepless vigils. Close upon her heels moved Mrs. Weatherby, the housekeeper, her broad frame quivering with suppressed alarm, her fingers ever twisting the hem of her apron. Behind them slouched Jarvis, the groom-sewlin, watchful, his small eyes shifting like trapped vermin. Then entered Dr. Lucius Murray, cold, saturnine, with the inscrutable mask of his profession frozen upon his lean visage. And lastly, the fluttering presence of Lady Ashcombe herself, her silks whispering as though to mock the hush, her lips incessantly moving in tremulous prayer or protest. Holmes stood at the far end of the gallery, his back to the cavernous hearth where logs smoldered in sullen glow. The light struck upward across his hawk-like features, carving them in lines of iron calm. His long, nervous fingers played idly with the serpent-shaped sleeve-link, which gleamed like a golden mote in the gloom. "Pray be seated," said he, and the quiet command in his tone stilled even Lady Ashcombe's flutterings. They ranged themselves upon the carved chairs in a broken semicircle, their faces pale blots against the dark tapestries. I took my place a little behind Holmes, as was my custom, my pen trembling with the sense that history was in the making. For a space there was no sound save the low moan of the wind and the stealthy tick of a distant clock. Holmes' gaze traveled slowly from face to face, as though reading upon each brow the hieroglyphs of conscience. At last he spoke very low, yet with that penetrating distinctness which made every syllable a goad. "This house has echoed to strange voices of late," said he, "voices that whisper of death by the river-bank, and death in a darker guise, silent, secret, most unnatural. You have each played your part upon this shadowed stage, and now the play nears its close. There is one among you whose hand has struck not once, but twice, whose brain has plotted with a craft at once profound and perilous. That hand shall not strike again." A quiver ran round the circle. Lady Ashcombe uttered a stifled cry. Miss Beatrice sat rigid, her fingers gripping the chair-arms like talons. Dr. Mercar, alone, stirred not, save that a faint gleam kindled in his somber eyes, like the phosphor of a midnight sea. Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though in ironic acknowledgment of some unspoken challenge. Then, turning with abrupt energy, he strode to a side table where lay certain objects which he had caused to be placed in readiness: a cut-glass decanter, a crystal goblet, and a folded paper upon which gleamed a tracery of strange characters. "You shall each, in turn, answer me a question," said he. "But first mark these tokens: the glass that bore death, the script that masked a threat, the jewel that linked the murderer to his doom. These, and one thing more which I have yet to show, shall tear the veil from the last dark corner of this tragedy. He paused, and in the hush I heard the crackle of the logs and the throb of my own pulse. I saw Lestrade stolid and baffled, gnawing his lip with vexation, while his eyes darted from Holmes to the pale, strained faces before him. "Mr. Holmes," quavered Lady Ashcombe, "for heaven's sake, what is it you would say?" "Do you mean that under this roof, madam?" broke in Holmes, with a gesture of courteous finality. "In 1 hour you shall know all. Till then, silence." And with that, he seated himself in the great chair at the hearth, his long fingers steepled, his gaze fixed in a brooding intensity that was more dreadful than speech. The circle before him sat like effigies of fear, waiting for the stroke of doom. Chapter 16. The reveal. Holmes breaks down the crime. The hush deepened, taut as a wire under strain. Outside, the gale smote the windows with a hollow boom, as though the elements clamored for admission to this tribunal of human guilt. Holmes rose slowly from his chair, his face alight with that cold, fierce fire which I had learned to dread less for what it portended to the guilty than for the inexorable logic it proclaimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," said he, his voice even almost languid, "you shall have the truth you crave. But mark it is no common tale of greed or jealousy that I unfold. Here is a crime clothed in the semblance of the impossible, yet wrought by hands no less mortal for their cunning." He moved to the side table and, with a gesture almost dramatic, lifted the crystal goblet so that the light struck through its facets in quivering rainbows. "This glass," he continued, "has borne death as surely as if it had been a chalice of poison. Within it lay a residue infinitesimal, yet fatal, love, curare, that dread toxin whose whispering touch stills the breath while leaving scarce a trace for science to detect. The man who died by the river did not drown. He was dead ere the waters closed upon him, and the hand that administered that doom was steady, learned, deliberate." A low gasp broke from Lady Ashcombe. Jarvis shifted uneasily, his jaw working like that of a baited hound. But Holmes gave no heed. He placed the goblet down and unrolled the folded sheet upon which strange symbols sprawled like a spider's trail. "Here," said he, "is the cipher that mocked us with its mystery, a message writ in the tongue of death, warning one victim, luring another. Its characters are not the idle scrawl of an illiterate groom, nor yet the trembling strokes of feminine fingers. No, it speaks of knowledge, and knowledge cloaked in secrecy." His eyes, keen as rapiers, flicked across the semicircle of tense faces, lingering for an instant to long for innocence upon the dark, impassive mask of Dr. Mercar. "Consider further," Holmes resumed, pacing now with that restless grace which heralded the climax of his thought. "When first I trod the gravel by the river, I noted 2 impressions, the deeper of a boot, the lighter of a slipper. Yet the angle of the heel betrayed a weight not consonant with the latter. A woman's shoe, yes, but worn by whom? A hand that sought to feign a lady's stealth, yet bore the strength of a man. From that hour the truth began to shape itself, shadow-like, before my mind. Miss Beatrice's breath came sharp. Her slender hands were clenched till the knuckles gleamed." Holmes halted abruptly, his thin figure etched against the red glow of the hearth, and his next words fell like the stroke of a sword. "The same brain that planned that masquerade contrived a second act, more perilous still, the attempt upon your life. Miss Ashcombe, by a draught whose bitterness was masked in cordial sweetness. Again, Kuraratha, poison of the Indian jungle, whose secrets lie hidden in treatises of science. And who among you, I ask, holds that key of knowledge? His hand shot out, rigid as a steel bar, and the name leaped like a pistol shot. Dr. Lucius Mer. For an instant, the man sat motionless, carved in ebony. Then a curious change passed over his face, flicker of sardonic humor, a flash as of steel striking flint. Slowly he rose, his lips curling in a smile that chilled the blood. "And you pride yourself, Mr. Holmes," said he, his tones smooth as oil, "upon unmasking me thus before this tribunal of fools. Well, play out your pageant. Let us see to what melodrama your logic will lead." But Holmes had already turned to us, his voice ringing clear above the storm that clamored without. "The drama ends not in guesswork, but in proof. The goblet holds his fingerprint, the cipher bears the impression of his signature, and in yonder drawer lies the bamboo tube wherein the poison was distilled. The net is drawn in." At this, a cry rang from Lady Ashcombe, a cry in which horror and relief were strangely blent, while Jarvis sprang half from his seat, only to sink back with a muttered oath. Dr. Mercar alone remained unmoved, save that his eyes burned like twin coals beneath the marble mask of his brow. Holmes' thin lips curved in a inexorable. "The play is over," said he softly, "and now, Lestrade, the law awaits its servant." The inspector lurched forward, fumbling for the manacles, while the storm without broke in a roar, as though the very heavens acclaimed the triumph of inexorable justice. Chapter 17. The final attempt to escape. For an instant, after Holmes' pronouncement, the room was as hushed as a crypt, save for the muffled roar of the tempest battering the old house. Then came a sound, a low, harsh laugh that made the blood creep along my veins. Dr. Mercar stood, poised like a panther at bay, his slender figure drawn to its full height, every line of it instinct with menace. His dark eyes smoldered with a light that was scarce human, a glare in which rage, scorn, and some strange exultation were commingled. "So," he said softly, his voice vibrant with deadly irony, "the great Sherlock Holmes, arbiter of destiny, scourge of evildoers, deigns to cast his net about me, and these," he flung a contemptuous glance at the others, "these witless sheep gape and bleat, deeming justice served because one man dares to prate of proofs." "Enough, Mercar," said Holmes coldly. "Your rhetoric will avail you little. The game is done." "Is it?" The word rang like the clash of steel. Before Lestrade, who had edged forward with the manacles, could stir, the doctor's hand flashed to his breast, and something gleamed in the firelight, a tiny vial, sinister in its simplicity. "Stand back, fools," he cried, his tone now harsh and guttural. "Another step and I send my soul to a darker tribunal than yours." Lady Ashcombe shrieked and clung to Beatrice, whose white face shone ghost-like in the glow. Jarvis cursed beneath his breath, but Holmes never stirred. His gaze met the murderer's with a steadiness that seemed to burn the very soul from his body. "You play your last card, Mercar," said he, his accents calm as ice, "but you err in deeming it a winning one. That vial holds death swift and certain, I grant you. Yet consider, the law would deal you a rope and a nameless grave. Which doom, think you, is the grimmer? which speaks more to that vanity which is your ruling passion. For the fraction of a heartbeat, Morker's eyes flickered, wavered, then hardened like tempered steel. I go as I came, he muttered between clenched teeth, master of my fates, slave to none. The hand that held the vial swept upward, but even as it rose, a lithe shape launched across the rug. There was a cry, and Inspector Lestrade, red of face and panting like a harried hound, had pinned the murderer in a grip that was iron in its tenacity. By the Lord, he gasped, wrestling with the man's desperate strength. Got him home. Quick, man, lend a hand. But Holmes merely stirred the embers with languid precision, as though the drama at his back scarce merited a glance. A little firmer on the left arm, Lestrade, said he in his silken drawl. There, so, the cords will suffice. Pray spare the man needless violence. He will stand in need of his strength. Then, for what lies beyond, panting, sweating, and muttering oaths, Lestrade bound the captive hand and foot, while Morcar sat like a fallen monarch, haggard, disheveled, yet unconquered in spirit. A strange smile curled his lips, as though he tasted some secret triumph denied to his jailers. Holmes at last rose and faced him, his gray eyes cold as winter seas. So ends the last act of your tragedy, Morcar, said he. The curtain falls yet, the echo of its thunder shall linger long in men's ears. The doctor's smile deepened, a smile bitter as gall. Think you have conquered, Holmes, he whispered hoarsely, you whose vaunted wisdom gropes but at shadows. Bah! The truth lies deeper, darker than your boasted logic dreams, deeper than death itself. And with that cryptic utterance, he sank back against the cushions, mute and motionless, as though the springs of his vitality were suddenly snapped. But whether that strange defiance veiled remorse, or masked some hidden purpose, yet unguessed, who shall say? Outside, the storm shrieked like a legion of lost souls, and the ancient house trembled to its inmost stones. Within, by the guttering fire, the drama of sin and retribution moved toward its inexorable close. Was an hour later when we gathered once more in the long drawing-room of Ashcombe Hall. The storm spent, and a pale dawn struggling through the stained windows, the air heavy with the reek of last night's fire and the sharper scent of crushed laudanum, seemed to vibrate still with the echoes of that fierce encounter. Dr. Morcar sat bound and mute in a high-backed chair, his features pallid yet composed, like some somber effigy of defiance. Holmes stood erect upon the hearthrug, his lean figure outlined against the dying glow, his aquiline face stern yet touched with an austere serenity. To me, who knew him best, there was that in his bearing which spoke of a mind supremely at peace, a craftsman who, having wrought his masterpiece, now surveys its perfection with quiet pride. Ladies and gentlemen, said he at length, his voice grave yet singularly musical, the hour has come when the tangled skein must be unraveled, when this dark enigma, which has so cruelly shadowed these ancient walls, shall yield up the last of its grim secrets. Beatrice, white and wan, leaned forward with clasped hands, her eyes fixed upon him in a mute agony of suspense. Lady Ashcombe, proud still, but shaken to her depths, drew her furs about her trembling frame. Jarvis, dour and sullen, lurked in a corner like a beaten mastiff. Lestrade, flushed with triumph, stood near the captive, his little eyes glittering with the satisfaction of a man who deems the end achieved, yet hungers for the reason why. Holmes' single quote's gaze swept the circle keen, luminous, pitiless in its penetration. Then he spoke, and every syllable fell like a stroke upon an anvil. "You saw but fragments of the truth," said he, "each dark and disjointed a broken pattern that mocked your reason. Yet to him who could read the cipher traced in blood and shadow, the whole stood revealed with terrible lucidity. The first fact, the apparent miracle of a man who died twice, was but the mask of a deeper mystery. Sir Alaric Ashcombe, once vigorous and stern, falls insensible in his chamber, breath suspended, pulse stilled, yet lives to breathe again. You deemed it nature's freak. It was art, diabolical art trot by a mind trained in the subtlest lore of life and death." His long, nervous fingers played with the air as he spoke, as though shaping those sinister thoughts. The drug. Watson, you recall the odor clinging to the glass, a compound rare and deadly, capable, in minute dosage, of arresting every outward sign of vitality, leaving its victim as one plunged in the abyss of dissolution, while consciousness flickers faintly in the brain like a lamp before extinction. Who but a master of toxicology could so contrive? Who but a physician skilled, audacious, unscrupulous? Hence, from the outset, my eye rested on Dr. Mercar. A stir ran through the group, but Holmes' calm flow was unbroken. And why this ghastly simulacrum of death? Why strike not once, but twice? Because, my friends, the motive lay not in blind fury, but in cold, inexorable design. Sir Alaric had stood as the one barrier between Mercar and his Protha heiress, whose fortune was as the breath of life to him. Love, bah! Call it, rather, that insensate greed which festers beneath the mask of passion. Failing to bend the old man's iron will, he sought to break it, to crush his spirit by fear, by horror, by that haunting sense of doom which is the subtlest torment of age. So the first stroke fell cloaked as nature's caprice. But fate, which toys with human cunning, played him false. For though the poison stilled the heart, the antidote administered in stealthric kindled the flickering spark. The old man lived, but lived to speak his dread suspicion, to summon Holmes of Baker Street. And then Mercar struck in earnest, lured his victim forth to the black pool, and wrought that second and fatal deed, clothing it with the semblance of accident beneath the thunder of the storm. A low cry broke from Beatrice's lips. Mercar's head sank upon his breast. Yet from the shadow of his lashes shot one baleful gleam, defiance to the last dot. Holmes went on, his tones vibrant with the stern music of justice. The clues were manifold, the footprints by the yew, the bruised wrist, the shattered reed, the odor upon the glass, the missing vial. Each, in isolation, trivial, united, damning. Add to these the man's demeanor, too placid for innocence, too studied for truth. And thus the chain was forged, a chain no human hands may break. He paused, and for a space naught stirred, save the whisper of the dying gale. Then, with a sudden change to that dry, half-humorous drawl which was ever the prelude to his retreat into the citadel of his own thoughts, he added, "The rest, I think, lies within the province of the land of Inspector Lestrade, who will doubtless adorn the annals of Scotland Yard with this notable exploit." A faint smile flickered across his lean features as Lestrade swelled with ponderous dignity. Then, turning to the window where the first spears of sunrise struck through the mist, Holmes said softly, as though communing with his own spirit, "Strange, is it not, Watson, how love warped from its high estate may rank among the most deadly forces of nature? The passions that lift man nearest heaven may, perverted, drag him to the abyss." A theme for the moralist, perhaps, but for us, my dear fellow, merely another proof that crime, in its myriad shapes, is ever the child of the same grim mother-human folly. And with that quiet utterance, he drew his cloak about him and passed from the chamber, as though the whole dark tragedy were but a trivial interlude in the pageant of his days.